A number of years ago, we had this, what was called a heat dome effect in Portland, and temperatures were predicted to get well over 110 degrees that day, and they did. It was really brutal. All the trees and the plants were wilting because we never experienced that kind of heat there. And I heard these crows going crazy in the alley. And I went back there, and a couple of neighbors had also heard the crows going crazy and went back there. And on the ground was this little baby crow. So the parents were going crazy because somehow the nest had fallen out of the tree. There's no way he would survive more than an hour out there. So I went inside, got a cat carrier, picked him up, and put him inside the cat carrier and brought him in. And unfortunately, my HVAC had gone out. And thank goodness the basement was cool enough. So I had this baby bird in a cage downstairs. And then the next day, another one fell out of the nest. So I had two birds and myself and two cats huddled in the basement. The smaller one, he didn't survive, but Karl survived. Little by little, he was growing up. Eventually, he got big enough where I knew he needed to come out of there, and I have a little sunroom in the back of my house, and he was able to fly around there, be on his own. But my God, that little bastard, he had to be fed every 5 minutes. I thought something was wrong with him. When crows are babies, they sound like a little duck. I downloaded some crow videos where it's just videos of damn crows doing crow shit. And I would put that on and play it loud, and it just didn't work. Eventually, he started sounding like a normal crow.
What, Karl? What? Karl.
The name Karl, it originates from my car mechanic, whose name was Karl. He was in the contacts of my phone, and one day I was out in my front yard, and there were some crows in the area watching me, and they kept calling out, Karl, Karl. My phone heard them, and then the phone said, calling Karl. Windows are always open in the summer, and he would fly as much as he'd fly around the house looking for me. And if he couldn't find me, he knew that he could always land on the outside of the window ledge here and start calling out. And like I said, he was very loud. But he knew if he landed here and called out, it would echo into this hallway. He would be able to lure me outside.
Come on, Karl. Come on. Come on, Karl. Come on. Come on. Come on, Karl. Come on. Yeah, here you go. Here you go.
And in order to make sure that I was always there when he needed to be fed, I would take him into my office, and he would sit on my shoulder for hours and just be with me, nibble at my glasses, and talk to me. This is my office, and I have my windows open all summer long. And he would perch on the top of the window outside and start calling out to me, and they're very loud. And most of the time he did that when I had meetings, sometimes with clients, and quite often he would jump up here on the desk and look at what I was doing and watch the mouse move around. I remember the first night that I left him outside overnight because I wanted him to become acclimated to not being in that room. And so I put him on a branch overnight. I was really worried about him. I didn't sleep at all that night because I knew he was there alone. The next day, I could not find him anywhere. And I went into utter panic, running everywhere to look for him. And then eventually he called out, and he was in one of the large oak trees up on the branch. He had managed to fly up there. He flew down from the tree and landed right on top of my head and pooped on my shoulder, and I just said, I love you so much. And that was a real eye-opening moment, how much I cared about him. One day, I had a water dish outside for the cats. Karl discovered that water, and oh my gosh, he couldn't get enough of it. And I didn't realize that he probably needed a bath, and they're very fastidious about keeping themselves clean. So I filled a little plastic container full of water, and oh my gosh, was he excited. Hot summer day, to get in there and just get the feathers all wet, get his feet in there, rolling around in the water. He was so excited to get a bath. And so it was just so fun to see the first time that he was exposed to open water like that. But what a goof that he took such an interest in everything that I did. He would walk with me out to the garden, he'd watch me pulling weeds, and immediately he would walk around and start pulling weeds with his beak. I grow hundreds of tomato plants, and I'm very meticulous about labeling them. Karl came here and picked every single one of these out of the ground, that little shit, and placed them wherever. And so for that year, I had no idea what my tomatoes were. And he'd get yelled at, and he knew it was bad, but he would do it just to be playful. The level of smartness and the hunger for learning that he had was really, it was amazing to watch. I watched a lot of videos on how smart crows and corvids in general are, and how they not only can do basic math, they also can recognize shapes and geometry. And they have gone 4 levels of reasoning to do one thing, to get this thing, to get this thing, to get the tool that gets the food. What we're discovering is how little we know about how smart these birds are. One time, Karl came to the window, and I wasn't giving him any attention, so he took off. And then he came back, and he had a small flower in his mouth that he had picked. And I was like, I think he's bringing me a gift. So I went out and I spent time with him. He figured it out immediately that if he brings me something, I will always come out. So I have a whole collection of things that he brought to me. I have a back patio. One day I was back there, and Karl took off. He came back and had the cigarette in his mouth and dropped it right in front of me, and then flew off again. A couple minutes later, I hear, hey! Karl flies back, and he's got a lighter in his beak and drops that off. And I'm like, son of a bitch, he's stealing from my neighbor. And I said, Karl, no, you take that back. And I shit you negative, he picked that lighter up with his beak, flew back over there, and dropped it off on the table right in front of her, and then came back to me. My neighbors knew him, the whole neighborhood knew him. Everyone would see me walk in the neighborhood with this little guy, either on my head, or on my shoulder, or flying from branch to branch, and walk on the sidewalk next to me.
He would fly back and forth around the house to see if Bobby was sitting up there in his office, or sit on our roof and squawk at Bobby to get Bobby's attention. So he was a good soul.
He was quite an anomaly and very popular with everybody, including the mailman, who thought for a long time that Karl was trying to attack him. Karl just wanted to land on his head and poop. He was a goof. Every time he called out, he would do this thing with his wings, which I never saw any other crows do, so I knew for sure that he was never going to fit in crow society because he was a dork. Well, he would wait on the roof for me all the time and peek at the roof so that he could see, and he would just sit up there by himself, sometimes for hours. That poor little guy, he had to be terribly lonesome. But one time, a couple of crows landed in the oak trees that are in my backyard, and they started calling out. He's looking at them and listening. And then suddenly 2 other crows showed up, then 4 others, then 10 others. It was the weirdest thing. They all called to one another because they saw him there. And he was just looking at them, and I knew that it was time. And I said, Karl, you've got to go. As much as I didn't want to lose him, I wanted him to go to a family who understood him and could raise him right. He just looked at them. Eventually, they started leaving one by one. He chose to stay with me. I wish he hadn't. So another time, I came home, and he was nowhere to be found. I went into panic and went looking for him. I eventually heard him, and this was at least 2 hours later, and he needed to be fed way more often than that, so I knew he was starving. But he was at least 6 blocks away, and I saw him up in a tree on one end of a branch, and on the other end of the branch was 2 crows. And I knew that was his parents. He had recognized them because he was standing there doing his little duck call who knows how long he had been there, and they were ignoring him. It was so hard to see, but I walked away because I had faith that eventually he would get into their graces. They would recognize him. They would take him back, whatever it was. But it was getting late in the day. It was getting dark, and I was really worried about him. And then I saw him walking down the street and over to my house, and I could see he was exhausted. It had been 6 hours, perhaps. He just went to the yard and he fell on his side. He was so dehydrated, so hungry. But I think more than anything, he was just so emotionally destroyed. I scooped him up, I held him, and he would just bury his beak inside my elbow and my arm, sobbing. And I just told him how much I loved him. I gave him some water, some food. He was able to sleep in the bed with me that night. And I took the next day off just to spend as much time as I could bringing him back. And he was always my baby boy, and he was very loved and safe with me. Another time, I came out, one of his eyes was swollen completely shut, and it was as though his head had been crushed in a little bit. And I heard from one of the neighbors that they saw another pack of crows attack him. He wasn't part of their clan. He eventually recovered from that.
Karl.
He contracted what was called, it was an avian herpes of some sort, but it's on the feet. Birds pass this virus by where they land, and a lot of birds die from it. Incredibly painful, but looking at these huge blisters on his feet, sometimes bigger than his toe, splitting open, and I wasn't sure he was going to survive it, so I did a lot of research to figure out how can you mend this. I did hydrogen peroxide or other ointments and hold him and dip his feet into the solution, and he'd be screaming and carrying on while I was doing that because he thought I was hurting him. And then I would have to hold him afterwards, comfort him. It was like an emotional roller coaster for both of us. But he survived that too. One day I was working. Suddenly I heard him, and it sounded very distressed. I panicked. I ran outside, ran downstairs, and outside he was spinning in the air in the claws of a hawk. And my parental instinct just kicked in, and I had some tomato plants back there, and I grabbed one of the plants and I threw it, and I managed to hit the hawk as they're spinning in the air. Karl flew for a minute and then ran back and flew right into my shoulder and then into my arms. And that goddamn hawk just flew right up on top of the roof of the house, 15 feet away from us, and just looked down and didn't leave and wasn't scared. I wanted to go back inside the house and grab my .22 rifle and kill the hawk, but I also knew that I wouldn't be able to live with myself, so I didn't. I always knew that when I come home, I'd be greeted by him. And then one time I came home and I called out, and he was nowhere to be found. And that was very unusual, and I knew that something was wrong. And so I looked around, and after an hour went by, and that's when I for sure knew something was really wrong. And then I started knocking on doors, asking all my neighbors if they've seen him. Maybe he found someone else to hang out with while I was gone, because that was the longest I had ever been gone, separated from him, other than overnight, sleeping. And everybody knew him, so they're all like, no, we haven't seen Karl. And they could see the panic in my voice. And those who didn't actually know him, I would show pictures that I had on my phone. I said, this is my bird. I know this sounds weird, but I have this little guy, Karl, and he's very tame, very, very nice. And if you see him, he'll come to you. But please let me know. And so I had my business cards, gave my business cards to all of my neighbors so they could call my mobile in case they saw him. And I couldn't find him anywhere. And as the hours went by, the panic just really set in. And I went across the street and I saw something at the base of the tree over here. And I knew that hawk had a nest nearby. At the base of this tree here is where I found a bunch of feathers. And like I said, I can smell, and I knew his scent. And So I picked up some of those feathers and put it into my nose, and I knew it was him, and I knew that he had been taken, and that somewhere up in that tree he met his end, and I couldn't bear to think about it, on how he died. But I gathered up all the feathers that I could, and I found them for weeks on end. I kept finding more of them and put them in a box and found a place to bury them out back. I never found his body. I wish I had, because he deserved that, but I had enough of him to place him in a memorial. But I don't think I had not felt that much loss and pain since I lost my parents, because we were really, he was pretty special. See how each of our cats have a little memorial. Oh, and that's little Karl right there. And this is where we buried Karl's feathers. I still think about him every day. And every time I see a crow, I call out his name, thinking that maybe somehow he got out. And maybe somehow he escaped, and that wasn't his feathers, even though I knew it was. His parents are back. They've raised another baby. And I've watched them raise this fledgling into a full-grown bird. But there's this Karl-shaped hole in my heart